I want to speak on living with courageous faith in a time when fear is so rampant. So, the beginning of every year, probably a lot like you guys, I want to get a kind of sense of what the year is going to be like, maybe get a word, just go before God, get a way to kind of get myself around the year and get prepared for it emotionally, spiritually, etc. And so I was sitting up in our little mountain house and looking at the mountains. It was a beautiful morning, I remember, and I felt this word kind of impregnate me, ripe. So I thought, yes, that is an awesome word for the year. And I wrote this down in my journal. I said, imagine 2020 is a year of ripe and ready promise, a taste bud tribute to this love story, too good to be true. A swallow and savor time, a taste and see story with edible sweet words, sticky to the touch with all their dribbled down grace. And now that word is mine, ripe. It's found roots in me, burrowed me, and seeded me with a kind of stupid satisfaction, wonder wedged into my eyes and the ways I'm seeing the world these days. So, good word, right? But what you won't know is my picture of it, how I thought that thing would play out, was a little off. Because I saw ripe as almost this kind of circumstantial thing, like almost like this divine truce we're going to have with God this year. Like, it's been a bit tough the last few years. We're going to have a bit of like a Club Med year. It's going to be a little bit of like a holiday vibe, you know? Like, wine glasses are not going to shatter. Cars are not going to need services. We were supposed to go around the world. And so I saw it, like if you could put a picture to it, it was almost like I was in a toga on a velour daybed, like gorging on grapes. You know, that's kind of like the way I thought ripe was going to play out this year. And actually, I remember somewhere midway in the year, I looked at my top emojis, you know, the ones that come up first, and they had changed. I always had like the happy face or the thumbs up or the dancing girl, and now it was like that one, like what's going on, or like the monkey, that one. Like it was just this like these emojis that just sort of embodied confusion. Like, where are we and what is going on? So somewhere between that dancing girl and the shocked monkey, my picture of the world went a little bit fraught, right? There were many what ifs, like, what if there's no more school this year? What if I can't see my parents for the next few years? What if my favorite coffee shop closes down? You know, there were many what ifs. And I had to go to the crux of my beliefs when everything was sort of getting stripped away this year and ask myself, is Jesus enough? If everything is taken from me, do I really believe what I profess with my lips? Is Jesus truly enough for me? 2021, I think, as AD said, it's like there's this sense of like pause, like paralysis around it. Like, can we dream? Like, can we even go there? And in my conversations that I've had with people, it's sort of less hesitant, like, nobody really knows what we have, if we have permission to live, you know, and to expect. And I, in that, saw a picture of just a foot on the other side of the line of 2021. And I felt like God was saying, step into it. Step into it, whatever that is. If it's just step into tomorrow or step into 2021. I have called you to front-footed faith and courage. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk about stepping forward into the promises of God. And the best example that I can think of is that guy Caleb in the Bible. So many of you probably know him from Sunday school, but he's a great Sunday school character, so I think he's worth reading. The context here is Moses, they came through the Red Sea, the waters parted, absolutely amazing, but they came through, but it wasn't just for the sake of coming through, it was going to. God was taking them into the promised land. And Moses sent out his spies, 12 spies, and he basically says, just go check everything out. Give me a full report. I want to know where they eat. I want to know what the soil's like. I want to know, are they big? Are they small? Are they rich? Are they poor? And the spies came back. And let's read from verse 21. It says, so they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rehob, near Lebo-Hamath. They went up into the Negeb and came to Hebron, Ahiman, Seshai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were there. Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt, and they came to the valley of Eshcol and cut down from there a branch with a single cluster of grapes, and they carried it on a pole between two of them. They also brought some pomegranates and figs. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster that the people of Israel cut down from there. At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran and Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told them, "We came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negeb, the Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites. Lions and tigers and bears that dwell in the hill country, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan." But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let's go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it." Then the men who had gone up with them said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they're stronger than we are." So we brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them." And then the people just wept and they complained. And later in verse 5 it says, "Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the people of Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, 'The land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them.'" It says that Caleb had a different spirit. Whenever it speaks of Caleb in the Bible, it speaks of a man with a different spirit. And that, because of that, he was eventually able to go on and to take his hill country and the land that was promised to him. Wow, okay. So, I'm just going to scream. So, how can we be a people of different spirit in this time? So I just thought, let's have a look at Caleb. Let's look at some attributes of him. And let's unpack courage through his person. So the first point I want to make is that Caleb understood mercy. I mean, Caleb went through the Red Sea. It parted. He was there. He walked on dry land. I mean, he saw as the Red Sea became an aquarium of walled water. He must have been trembling as he went through. He saw his enemies engulfed by the waters. I can just imagine at Passover, and he just like tears of gratitude streaming down his face. Like, thank you, God. Thank you, God. He didn't have some theoretical understanding of his rescue. He had a very first-hand experience of it. Nobody had to tell him that he was rescued. He knew it, and he knew it was only by grace alone, not by anything of his own merit. See, it was 430 years that the Israelites were in Egypt as slaves, but it took them only 4 hours to move from a state of slavery into absolute freedom. Courage starts with understanding the depth of our depravity, the state of our slavery, and our spiritual death. And then understanding from that point how much God has done for us. It says in Hebrews 7, He is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through Him. I think the more we understand the uttermost of our death, our sin, our depravity, and then how God got in there and rescued us and continues to rescue us, that gives us courage. A couple years ago, Ben was having a hard time. And we didn't really know what's going on. So when they're small, you kind of say it's like they didn't have enough sleep. But then there's that point you can't blame it on sleep anymore, so then we started blaming it on hormones. It's like that point at which suddenly, you can say maybe it's hormones, So we were like, okay, maybe it's hormones. But he was just having a bit of a tough time. And he was stepping away from us a bit. And I would often say to Luther, like, we just have to pray. Something isn't right. And I went away and came back. And a couple nights later, it was worship at church. And he and Tristan had a little bit of a Barney and brought him outside and just said, what is going on? And Ben just broke down. And I sent Tristan inside. And why don't you come up, my boy? This is not a surprise. I have asked Ben's permission to share. And he shared with me what went down. And he said to me afterwards, Mom, I don't know what to do now. I don't know whether to be angry at myself. I don't know whether do I beat myself up? Should I be embarrassed? And I said, you know what, my boy, this is what you must feel. And I took him with my hands, his head in my hands, and I said, forgiven. That's how you must feel. You're forgiven. And he fell on my chest and he wept on my chest. And he went back in much later. And for the next week, he just wanted to sleep next to us. He just wanted to be next to me. And we had such a beautiful time of just enjoying each other. And I felt like I got my boy back. Thank you, Ben. You did a good job. You can go back now. Because I think that's a picture of what salvation is. When we can look into the eyes, the loving eyes of this Father who knows what we deserve, and he only comes back to us with mercy to say, you're not just forgiven, it's forgotten. It's behind us. Now let's go back in. Let's go back in for more. And that's salvation. And from there, why wouldn't we want to grow close? Why wouldn't we want to lean on his chest and be intimate with him? When we rest in his rescue, we rest from the storm. And it's far more timeless, that storm, than a political storm or the storm of COVID or media storms. It's the storms that beat against the hatches of our humanity. It's those storms that try to erode our sense of sonship and daughtership. It's the storms that make us so tired and tossed by all that striving and self-defining, this thing that we have to make our own way, that we have to define everything from our destiny to our gender these days. It's not the way of God. But when we can come face to face with the depths of our brokenness, and God can take us and cup our hands in his face and say, you're mine. Give it to me. You don't have to make your own way. Just come to me. You're forgiven. I think only then we can live with that different spirit like Caleb did. We can live free and we can live brave. So the first point is he understood mercy. The second point is he kept his heart clean. Matthew 5 says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. What's amazing to me is that all 12 came back with the fruit. They all brought the fruit, but only 2 saw the fruit. They all made the journey from Hebron, from the mountains of Hebron back to camp, but only 2 made the journey from here to here, from their conviction to their confession. Fear can keep you from seeing the fruit in your life. So what are you seeing? I mean, the reality is, those are some really scary people. Those Anak people were giants. They were enormous. They were like the NBA on steroids. They were very big. People have put them in at, commentators have said anywhere between 8 feet and 30 feet. I think 30 feet is a bit high, but everybody agrees it's about 10 feet or so. That's very large. And it's easy to understand why they gave a bad report. It's a little bit like Mary. I feel like Mary always gets a bad rap, but if Jesus were coming to supper at my house, I would make sure the rice was not burnt, you know? I think sometimes they give Mary a hard time, but she was doing her best, you know? I'm just joking. But I think that these guys too, it's easy to criticize them, but anything other than that report is a little bit like insanity. Because yes, they're grapes, but they're also skull-crushing 10-foot gangsters roaming around in the land, you know? It is understandable that they gave that report. And so your conclusion is either Caleb and Joshua are loonies, or they're just in another stratosphere. AKA, they're being Christian. They're just doing what their dad said, right? The circumstances might be a bit dire or a bit more extreme, but it's the same principles at play. They're just doing what their dad said. And if their dad said, like in Numbers 14:8, if the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey. He will give it to us. Well, then he will give it to them. I think they had just come from the Red Sea. They saw that miracle. Why can't he take the NBA on, right? He can do that as well. For them, it was obvious because I think they were remembering their salvation story and they were telling it to themselves daily. And that's what we need to do. We need to tell us our salvation story daily. And I'm not just talking about for those who have encountered Jesus and given our lives over. I'm not talking just about that initial encounter with Jesus. Psalm 68:19 says, what a glorious God. He gives us salvation over and over. Then daily he carries our burdens. In the Greek, that word salvation is plural. It's multiple salvations. We are daily being saved by Jesus if we actually open our eyes to see. And I think they were telling themselves that story daily. So it was just another wonderful chapter in this wonderful book where God wins. It just had different baddies, but it had the same outcome. So what are your baddies at the moment? Is it the economy? Is it COVID? Is it racism in your heart? Is it unforgiveness? What are the things that you're up against? Is it just the idea of wearing a face mask on the beach in December? I mean, it could be many things, but seriously, maybe it's the competition, going into a new job, maybe you don't have a job at all. We all have baddies, and there are so many giants, and they are all very real. I mean, you notice Caleb and Joshua didn't not mention the giants. That was part of the report. There are giants. They just didn't assign the final authority to them. God wants to have the final say over our situation. Yes, there are giants, and they will be there. But actually, we're going to do it with him. And if we're with him, we're in the majority. We're on the winning side. When they called themselves grasshoppers in their own eyes and in the eyes of others, they were just essentially assigning divinity to the giants. They were relinquishing their power and their testimony and just assigning divinity to these guys that actually had no authority for it. And so often we do that ourselves, don't we? See, what Jesus did on the cross, the depth of the power of the cross, that cross that rose him from the dead, dwells within us. Let's not easily relinquish that. Let's not take that lightly. Let's not speak the higher word over that which has no authority. Let's take the words of God and the cross of Christ and have that speak the better word over whatever our situation is. So on to point 3. Caleb understood mercy, Caleb kept his heart clean, and Caleb never let go of God's promises. So Caleb means dog, right? But I don't think of Caleb like a golden retriever. He's more like, hey Sadie, he's more like a Jack Russell, you know? He just bites down on the promises of God, and you could swing him around and he'll just go for the ride. because God has spoken and he's not letting go. He was 85 years old when he eventually got that hill country. And that was after some serious fighting. They gave it another go. Joshua went into the land. They conquered the northern kingdoms, the southern kingdoms, Jericho. There was lots of blood, lots of fighting. You would think the guy might be tired. I mean, he's 85 years old and he was part of the fight. But this is what he says in Joshua 14. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he's kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said. So he didn't go to Joshua and be like, listen, I'm 85. I think it's done, you know. Give me my mountain retirement retreat center up in the mountains of Hebron. I just want to play hibachi and chill out. He didn't do that. I think he chose the mountains of Hebron not because it had a great view, but because of who was in it. The Anakites were those big NBA top-picked, scary, giant people. And he wanted to find the biggest enemy he could to maximize God's glory. I think he would be the most unlikely of guys, 85 years old. They're the most likely guys to win. But hey, the Lord helping, I will drive them out because God said it. I think he wanted to put God and his power on surround sound on his way out as much as he could. And he got that hill country. He didn't just believe God on his words, he actually stepped into it. He asked. In a way he didn't demand, but he reasoned his way into, actually, I deserve this. I think it was Tony Evans who said, the promises of God are not in your hand, but they're within your reach. And you've got to go out and you've got to take them. So there's a point at which we believe, but then we must step out. We must bury his word in our heart and believe on it. And then when he says move, we need to move with him. So what is this inheritance in today's terms? So Caleb was called to conquer lands. I don't think that's really like a 21st century thing anymore. I don't think any of us have that calling. But I think that it's a twofold thing. First of all, we all have an inheritance, right? Because the giants are indication of the fact that there is a promised land. Otherwise, what's the point of defending anything if there's nothing to defend? So we can see the giants not in a sense of condemnation, but as confirmation of the fact that there is something worth fighting for, right? And I think that inheritance, first and foremost, is Jesus. Jesus is our greatest inheritance. He is our Caleb. He's the one who holds up the finished work of the cross, like those grapes over our lives, and says, look at this. Look at what I've done. This is good news. You're afraid? You think I'm not for you? Go back here. Go back to the cross. Get yourself back to the cross. If you feel that anything is too big or too large or too despairing, go back and take a good, hard look at what I have done on the cross for you. If I will do that there, what will I not do for you now? So he is our Caleb that says, you can do this. You can do this. But he's also our Canaan. He's our promised land. He's the one into which we enter. Hebrews 4 says, for God still has ordained a day for us to enter into, called today. For it was long afterwards that God repeated it in David's words, if only today you would listen to his voice and do not harden your hearts. Now, if this promise of rest was fulfilled when Joshua brought the people into the land, God wouldn't have spoken later of another rest yet to come. So we conclude that there is still a full and complete rest waiting for believers to experience. As we enter into God's faith rest life, we cease from our own works, just as God celebrates his finished works and rests in them. So then we must give our all and be eager to experience this faith rest life, so that no one falls short by following the same pattern of doubt and unbelief. He wants us to rest in his rescuing. He wants us to enter into him and to experience, to taste and see, like that word I felt at the beginning of the year, to taste and see that he is good, to hide in the center of the storm and let him do all the fighting on our behalf. But there is another inheritance, and it's not just a spiritual one. There is a material inheritance here and in the life to come. And that's a bit contentious, because we even spoke about it in home group this week and said, yeah, but isn't Jesus enough? And he is. He really is. As we sang, like, our gaze will be transfixed on his face. There is nothing more. But for us to say that there's nothing here on this life that we're contending for would be unbiblical. Even Jesus himself said, even he was looking for rewards. He said, Father, glorify me in your presence with the glory I had with you before the world began. Jesus was asking for rewards. He was asking to be blessed, to be glorified. There are tangible rewards in this life and in the next life to come. And we were chatting earlier in the week, and Adi said, it's not going to be like we're all wearing nappies floating around. Thank God for that. But this idea that we're playing harps on the clouds, and that we're just like, just singing eternally and some high pitch. That sounds like hell, honestly. And I am so glad that there is a lot more. That it's going to be a lot more real. We're going to eat really good ice cream, and we're going to walk on this earth, and we're going to work and toil the land. We're going to have hobbies we've never had time to do here on earth. We're going to do amazing, amazing things. We're going to sit with Jesus, and we're going to feast. And we're going to hear, where were you when that thing happened? And it's going to be amazing. But how we live now will determine something of our eternity. That old adage that she's so heavenly minded, she's no earthly good, I don't believe it. I do think the more that we put our eyes on the end game, the game, because this now is just really the pep talk in the locker room. But we have, as Adi showed us last week, that eternal rope that's just wrapping forever and forever and a day around earth. If we put our eyes there and contemplate what's to come, how much more earthly good will we be here? I want to maximize my time here on earth and bring as many with me as I can. And just to sum it up, I just want to highlight one last point from this story. So back to the days of Joshua, and when Caleb, now he's gone to Joshua, he's asked for the hill country. The spies go in, and he sent in only 2. They learned their lesson. They're not going to do 12 this time. And they send in 2, and they meet Rahab, and this is what Rahab says. She says, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. They could have had it the whole time. What she's essentially saying is, for the past 40 years, we've been really freaked out by you guys, because we have heard how your God came through for you. They could have had it the whole time, but they didn't step into it. But those giants that they were afraid of, they were more afraid of them. It says Israel only inherited 10% of the land that God had promised to them. And I wonder, how much of my inheritance am I living in? How much are you living in? But what's so encouraging is that Caleb never gave up, but more, God never gave up. God just patiently waited, and his word stayed his word. And maybe you feel, in a sense, like you've blown it, or it's too late. Maybe you feel like you regret some years, time that you wasted on whatever, something other than Jesus. Never underestimate what God can do with what's left of your years. Caleb, through no fault of his own, had to walk around the wilderness for 40 years because the Israelites never entered into that land because of their unbelief. And maybe you've been walking around in circles, the same circles around the same temptations or habits or, I don't know, ways of thinking, sin, defaults, and you feel deflated, or you feel despondent, or you just feel like, oh, I just cannot get this thing right. It's never too late. That's what Caleb's story tells me. It's never too late. If an 85-year-old man can take on giants, slay them, and open up an inheritance for generations to come, he can do that for you. He can do that with your story, with your hill country. Don't underestimate the power of Christ within you and the power of his salvation story. We're on the winning side. Our victory story, what Christ has done for us, we're always on the winning side. The world is quite lost, and it's desperately sick, and it's waiting for men and women with the faith of courage, the courage of Caleb, to rise up and to believe God on his promises. It's waiting. And actually, when they encounter the true God, their hearts will melt with fear because of who he is and what he's capable of. So let's stretch like that. Let's stretch like Caleb into his promises, and let's rise to reap them.